as we're pushing that agenda forward, it brings and heightens the inclusive state. So when we're talking wise practices, it's the ability to learn from each other and share wisdom and knowledge through that. If we're talking about best practices, that's heightening to say that, you know, we're the best at something when we're not. We're all learning and all lifelong learners here on this journey. So to be able to provide wisdom to each other, and rather than, you know, saying that this is the best or the only way of doing this, it opens the realm of saying that there are a number of different ways in doing this, and we each come with a different perspective. And that essentially comes from wisdom and experience.
Nice. So you were talking about ICER. So ICER is the Indigenous Community Industry Relations Certificate Program that Tim had a big hand in helping to develop. And there are some pamphlets over there for anyone who's interested in engaging in that process. They're 4-day modules. They're very accessible for executives and for employees to be able to take. The curriculum was developed hand in hand with not only the chief and councils of Treaty 6, 7, and 8, the Métis Nations and the Métis General Council, but also with the hereditary leadership and the elders in the communities. So the curriculum of the course is community driven, and the course is co-taught by Indigenous scholars and elders. And it took us 10 years to get to the point where we could deliver it. So it's not something that was engaged in lightly, and it is started in ceremony. And so I encourage you to learn about that. You'll hear Dr. Pat Makokas speaking at the Women Building Futures closing tomorrow about what she has to offer, and she is the lead who developed and the curriculum for the program. So
I said I'll be quick, promise. But yeah, it did take us 10 years to get to it, and I want to say that CFAR broke the bank doing it. And when we did it, I know I was one voice on the board that said, if we do nothing else and this organization folds, this course will be the legacy that we leave, and I'm good with it. The fact that Pat Makokas came, and please, I hope tomorrow you take the time. If you have not met Pat Makokas, she is the first woman warrior that I met when I came down south, and I consider her my sister, and she is, I get emotional every time I think about Pat, but she was the one who brought that course home, and it's an incredible course.
thank you, Tim. So something that you know, we talked about briefly was feeling safe within our workplaces to self-identify. Something that we talk about in our workplaces is occupational health and safety. We have built into our agendas in our workplaces safety moments. We talked a little bit about that last night. How comfortable was it in your companies when you started asking people to volunteer to contribute a safety moment in your company? Did anybody experience any uncomfortableness in their companies and communities where you do that? Lots, right? So I was in Saskatchewan at a Whitecap Dakota First Nation event, and somebody got up there and said that they had started to introduce Indigenous cultural moments on their agendas in their company, and they do it on every agenda. Every meeting that has an agenda, there's an Indigenous cultural moment. And somebody volunteers to share what they learned. So I offer that as a suggestion in how we can talk about and start to talk about incorporating cultural safety and policy at the highest levels of government. In our community governments, in our urban governments, our municipal governments, our provincial governments, and our federal governments, we need to talk about cultural safety. Alita, what would be your observations and suggestions about how partnerships are furthered by ensuring cultural safety, and what have you seen as a wise practice in that area?
So cultural safety, something currently within AECOM, we work a lot through mentorship, bridging mentorship motives, as well as bidding and tender mentorship for our subcontractor companies that are looking to either come under the AECOM umbrella or learn what that looks like. And we currently, on a number of our projects right now, we host and do Indigenous awareness training right there in the community or whatever traditional territory we lie within, and have elders present. I encourage youth advocacy because I do believe youth have a powerful voice in this. So to be able to bridge that understanding and have a two-way knowledge barrier or two-way knowledge sharing has increased cultural safety awareness for us, but also understanding from a subcontractor perspective, you know, not only given the current state, but what the inspiration is there. Where are they looking to go? What is the 5, 10, 20-year goal? And how can we work effectively with that? And what does that look like for AECOM, for outcomes? And then what does that look like for subcontractors?
Great. Good tie-in. Thank you. So Tim, one of the things that we want to share briefly about with our folks here gathered to learn from us, some of the wise practices in business, are examples how relationship first can benefit employment and training. What wise practices we can engage in employment and training to ensure that Indigenous community members who may not have had experience in the workforce yet can get there. And I know that you had a great relationship with Battleford's Agency Tribal Chiefs and the now Federation of Sovereign Indian Nations. So one of the practices that I understand that Ed Standinghorn implemented was, and I'll just share one, and then I'll ask you to share some with the group about what worked and why Royal Camps was so well served by that relationship. One of the practices, simple, was sending a care package back home to the family on the res or in the community that said, hey, thanks for sending us your person. Your person is working at our camp and they're doing awesome. And here's a little care package for you to say thank you, and your person is fine, and they'll be home in 10 days. So that's one of the things that I thought was easy to implement, very appreciated, community-driven, community-minded, and I wonder how many you would like to share with us, and I'm just gonna ask you to be brief because we need to have time for questions and answers too.
So in terms of BATC, what I will say is it's a relationship that began in a conversation and a small practice that saw a few tens of people go through an opportunity for training and such, and a little award ceremony that morphed into a 5-year relationship that saw over 450 people have a work experience opportunity, and of those, about 50 to 60 have become a mainstay in our workforce. And the numbers, the work experience numbers are staggering. We are absolutely joyful about the 50 or 60 core that have stayed with us. We don't expect everyone to work in workforce accommodation or think it's for them. We don't expect everyone to just work with Royal Camp. So in terms of BATC, it was an informed conversation, and it takes knowledge on both sides and the wisdom to know that neither of you knows everything, but that you can each bring something to the table. BATC, what made them special as an Indigenous group, and I'm going to say his name one more time, Ed Standinghorn, because he is an incredible human being, and he gets it, period. Ask me what it is, everything. Ed gets it. Leadership supported Ed to develop a program through their assets organization that didn't put the full onus on industry. What it did was it acknowledged those things that they could do internally to support themselves, and that they either were funded to support or that they could seek funding to support. But that they came to us with, what have we got? We have got jobs. How can we help you get people to those jobs? We can participate in training sessions. So we participated in training sessions. We can work with you on transportation, but we can't carry the burden. There's no client that we have that is paying us to transport people around. That comes out of our bottom line. So we have to figure out how to work together to make those things happen. So we would go to the community, participate in the career fairs, be around events. We would do any of the training sessions that were held twice a year. They acknowledged that at the time we had the greatest place for employment were places that had drug and alcohol pre-testing requirements. They didn't burden us. They actually took the initiative and said, we will make certain that is handled. We will only get you people who are ready. to be able to work. The other people will work with them, and we'll let you know when they're ready. So they removed some of the burden from us, but we certainly supported them by providing, in our case, our certifications are nominal, food safe, standard first aid, so we could help them in delivering those products and working with it. So in the end, we ended up with a program by collaborating, by talking over a period of years, building momentum that allowed us to achieve those kind of results. But it was both sides finding their own strengths, not one or the other saying to the other, you do it all. That was, I think, the key to the success in that one.
Thank you. I know when I saw Ed recently, he mentioned that he still is blown away by the fact that when he asked if Tim's first meeting with this gentleman around this project, Tim drove down from Edmonton to Calgary to meet him for lunch and then drove back to Edmonton. And in our communities, people don't, industry doesn't make that kind of effort typically. They want an easy fix and a quick fix, or they did historically. So I think Royal Camp's percentage of people in the workforce who are from our communities is indicative of the strength of relationship that was built. I'm sure if you called Ed today and he's at a new organization, you guys would find a way to create a partnership that would benefit both Royal Camps and the organization that he's worked with, and do that easily because it's relationship based. So in my experience, I've been with Tarpon now for 5 years, and we work with the elders, as you heard earlier. And Tarpon has given me the freedom to build relationships through going to and attending committees and et cetera, across Canada. It's gotten to a point now where when people need our services and want to form a partnership with somebody who offers the lines of service that we offer, I see them all the time. I have a relationship with them, and we have a certain level of trust for one another. And where there's opportunity, we can just pick up the phone and say, what do you want to build? Well, isn't that the way it is with humans everywhere? And why did industry ever think that it was any different building relationships with Indigenous communities? I suspect that has something to do with why Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada had to be engaged and do the work that they did. People talk a lot about reconciliation, and they don't like the harsh realities of truth. But without truth, you can't understand why communities are in the economic plight that they're in. Tim mentioned earlier that without trust, you can't move forward. When you think about what happened in residential school, then you understand that people were afraid to learn. So now that we're allowed to farm and allowed off the res, now that we're allowed to hire lawyers, we're allowed to go to post-secondary school, we're allowed to vote. Did you know that disenfranchised women got the vote in 1985? 1985, folks. That's the truth. And there's a lot more harsh reality around that truth. Somebody came here and planted a flag and claimed our country. So yes, we are a diverse country, and we do embrace that, as Tim said earlier. But we are the first people of this land. And there is a different responsibility and accountability to that truth. So Alita, I know that's a pretty light subject. Tell me about the resilience that you see in community when people are engaged authentically and a company wants to build something with the community, for the community, that also positively impacts their bottom line. Okay, I'm going to try that again. Tell me about the resilience that you see in communities when you're out there working to benefit them, keeping in mind everything that you know, worldview, truth and reconciliation, and the company's bottom line and your responsibility to that company, because that's a difficult road.
So seeing resilience in a community, I guess, essentially comes from understanding the community. So when I'm asked to go out and engage with the community, I make sure that my company understands that I'm going to be out there for the full day. Because, for example, I was out in Fort Chipewyan, outside of Fort McMurray, when I was with Careers, and I literally took my whole day just to drop into every department, go to the school, talk to the teachers, go to the band office, and really get the grassroots understanding of what makes the community, who they are, their beliefs, worldviews, and essentially become as resilient as they are today. And my findings in that go deeper than just what my original, I guess, intent was in going to the community. It's understanding from the youth, it's understanding from the elders, and then it's also understanding from the movers and shakers in the band office that are essentially going towards a common goal. And so if I can understand full circle within a community, grassroots, what they're looking for, it helps me think outside the box rather than, you know, just your band office meeting. You're keeping in mind the other individuals that you meet, and also giving that time. You learn that people want to share their history. They want to share their story. They want to share where they come from. And I think that's a huge gap that we're missing when we actually when we're going into meaningfully engage. And meaningful, like I said, tossed around various different ways, but actually understanding the community and the resilient phase they're in. A company can surely understand that by just giving time and being conscious of time, not being conscious of time, but making sure that you're investing yourself and also taking the time to understand, you know, where you are and where you're going and how long of importance this has been to that community. So, yeah.
Thank you. It's a difficult subject, right? So one of the other things that we see often is when a proponent has an opportunity and people are responding to that bid and there's a community in the local area, the opportunities for that community to participate, if there's a short timeline on the bid, then the subcontractors who want to respond to the proponent on that and serve that need will look at the green labor opportunities and don't really have time or don't have the ability or infrastructure set up already to look at secondary jobs, job laddering. I remember hearing a story in Saskatchewan about a company who had very successfully engaged the local community in the northern part of Saskatchewan, and they had something like 50 people working every year that were added at the green level of the job laddering equation to work in the mines in the north. 50 people from the community every year engaged. And 10 years later, nobody in a management position. So the organization that was helping to get those 50 people every year into that mine approached the company, the mining company, and said, how come there's no Indigenous people in management? And the company said, well, because we don't have to move them into management. We're giving you 50 jobs a year. Like, what's the problem? And that person who was trying to get those people up the job ladder into better jobs actually paid that company the equivalent salary for 2 of those green laborers to move into the next job on that job laddering system. He paid their salary differential to move them up there. And the company said, okay, yeah, that worked great. And nothing else happened. Does that make any sense? Yes, Tim.
No, just because it follows on our keynote speaker at lunch. So one of the things we were just moving into, a large part of my 10 years with my former employer was just teaching, getting people in position to be ready to do things. The last 4 years were the successes were starting to come. One of them was it's not just about client corporations making building into subcontractor contract language. It's also about in your own internal language. So what I was working on was I was being empowered to let managers know, regional managers, vice presidents, superintendents, how does everybody get a job? I don't know what industry you're in, but I know in oil and gas, quite honestly, it's called a black book. The superintendent knows who he can trust to get a job done. You call your supers, your super call their boys. How do you get in the gang? If you can't get in the book, you can't get in the gang. There are relationships. So I spent a lot of time talking to people about how do you move from that greenfield hire, that start point, so that we were getting to the point where, and it was, wait for it, boys, because it's coming, building into their bonus performances the fact that they engage with the community. I will say this now afterwards, because at the time I just didn't want to admit to anybody. So in a corporation that peaked out at 15,000 people, I was a department of one. Nobody knew that because I just kept driving up and down the highway. I just kept doing whatever I had to do to keep moving that organization forward. But a department of one with 49 locations operating throughout Western Canada, you tell me really where that level of commitment is. So I needed more partners. So that's what I said to management. You have got to get your people. I'll teach them to engage because they're the ones ultimately making the decision. They're the ones looking at their crews and how they operate. So we were just at the point of building into their performance Indigenous as a separate component. What are you doing in your region?
Yeah, well said, well asked. So I know there are lots of you who are interested in specific topics that we might not be addressing. Has anyone had an opportunity to write down any questions? There's some coming? Okay, so that's great. And while those are coming, you know, I wanted to talk a little bit about Ed Standinghorn again. And the pilot project that he was involved in was, and Jason Kuchicum from File Hills Qu'Appelle Tribal Council was also involved in this project. And of course, the feds shut it down after it had the terrifying results. This is kind of mean. It was really successful. Social assistance payments in the community dropped by $800,000 in 6 months. $800,000 in 6 months because the community was engaged. This happens all the time in our communities. It's one of the reasons why that trust level isn't there and government changes and programs are stopped. Programs that are working. Communities know what they need. And they will tell you what they need when you engage with them authentically. When you're in the community and you're not just there to win a bid or get the next project. And why wouldn't you be? Indigenous peoples are connected to this land that we all share. And their wise practices will create the future that we will be able to benefit from together forever. Because without their wise practices, we are not going to survive. Communities are not against development. They're pro-responsible, inclusive equity development. I think that's the bottom line in terms of how you want to look at developing partnerships with communities. And every community is different. Every individual in the world has different strengths and different challenges. It's the same with communities, but they know what the answers are. So we don't need to go and plant a flag in a community and say, hey, I've got all the solutions that you need. They know. So have the conversation and listen. So, you know, that would be what my experience has shown me in some of these areas of practice. So I'm going to pick the one that has the least words on it for now. Ah, what a great question. Can you give us an example of an Indigenous cultural moment? So all of us will give you an example. I'm going to pick the easiest one, the land acknowledgement that starts every meeting. It would be an example of an Indigenous cultural moment. And I expect whoever asked that question to use these in your companies.
I always bring learnings from communities that I've visited and just give a bit of background of what I've learned.
Another would be just acknowledgement and recognition of elders and the guidance and wisdom that comes with age. The larger society has a very interesting approach to aging, and it's certainly not Indigenous.
And also if you're working within an organization that may not be familiar with Indigenous happenings around the world, also providing news updates, what's going on in the news, what's happening in community, any new elections coming up, stuff like that.
Fantastic. So another question is, what are some of the ways businesses can get involved with Indigenous peoples on a national level? Are there associations that spread their resources across Canada to multiple communities? So whoever asked that question, do you have a pen out? Nation Talk, CCAB, Circle for Aboriginal Relations, AFOA, National Aboriginal Economic Development Board, Inspire, sandrasuter.com. Sorry.
No, no, you've actually listed probably initial ones, I would say.
Métis Women's Economic Security Council, First Nation Women's Economic Security Council. Those councils developed a portal that's on the Government of Alberta website that will provide resources for how Indigenous communities can connect to ways to prosper their economy and social situations. So remember that we are all connected, we are all related. And we are all connected and we are all related. So wellness within, we cannot engage in productive social or economic constructs without healthy social constructs. And culture is the only way for Indigenous people to heal, and I suspect it's the best way for the wise way, sorry Alita, for all of us to heal. Go ahead.
What I wanted to say was you can't wait for them to reach out to you. You have to reach out to them. It actually starts with you. So I'm going to throw this little plug in. Circle for Aboriginal Relations is a non-profit society of practitioners, about 200 of us. And in the end, we could be a great resource for people to start to network with people who do engage. And you'll be able to find organically all sorts of opportunities that have existed around you that you didn't know about. Just like I didn't know there was an Indian on the island of Montreal or the South Shore until I was 17 years of age.
Is he still there?
One. But I found out because of Akwesasne and what happened in Quebec in the late 1980s, real easy.
Okay, so did you know that there's a Métis flag planted at Lac des Arcs as you go around to Banff? And there's a gentleman who goes out there every year and to make sure that that's there. Should a company hire dedicated Indigenous stakeholder resources? Can we trust our frontline leaders to build necessary relationships, give them training and incentives, etc.? Well, the incentive is working with the people, in my opinion, and my colleagues will answer this as well. Alita, give that to me. Thank you. Okay, were you listening? So liaisons, should companies hire them? Should they train them and should they trust them? Well, if you're going to hire a liaison and not trust them, then don't hire them. Hang on. Also, Circle for Aboriginal Relations is a network of Indigenous liaisons because it's all about relationship, period. Yeah.
Because the expectation, so one of the things I like to communicate is the difference of expectation. I like to consider myself a gentleman walking, with feet in two worlds. And so from the corporate side, what I typically have experienced is, and nothing against anybody, please, but most of the time people get engaged in the Indigenous side of things for the wrong reasons. Contracts, profits, shareholder, blah, blah, blah. I understand that those are the things that drive and motivate getting things done. But in the end, it starts with a commitment to actually wanting to engage. And if the company is willing to do that, then you're going to go out and try to seek and find people to build either at least one person, if not a team, but you're going to put people in a position to be able to move your company towards being engaged while you focus on, internally, many of the prime drivers that move your company along. It's very hard on the other shoe. It's very hard for practitioners who come into corporations or companies to understand what they're actually up against. They actually think the company is interested in being involved in Indigenous engagement. And then they come up against all the walls. Management saying, no, there's no money for doing any kind of community investment. No, there's no money to train. No, we don't train. We're not in training. I'm sorry, what? Your company said you train. That's what you say right on your website, you say you train. Oh no, the client's not paying for it now, so we don't train. These are real truths that I'm speaking. That people who come in from the Indigenous side, a person like myself who's, I guess I'll just say it that way, lived in both worlds, I'm the guy who makes, I'm the guy who makes the white guy feel comfortable. I'm sorry for saying that, but that's who I am. I'm the guy who takes management, who's focused on projects, profits, bottom line, managers, all the stuff, supply chain and everything else. And I tell them, it's going to be okay. I'll get you where you need to go. But I need a little support. I need you to do certain things, or at least allow me to do them. The most difficult thing is to bring an Indigenous engagement person of Indigenous heritage into your organization, because they thought you brought them in because you wanted them there. And then they find out that it's not quite as important to the company overall as they were led to believe. Happens a lot. And they leave, actually. You'll find oftentimes they leave because they're so dissatisfied. There's no job satisfaction. They spend their whole time fighting with everybody about what they thought they were hired to do. That's just a practical reality. Just thought I'd throw it out there. I'm open. I'll give my cell number to anybody. I'm not open for employment, but I'm open to share.
Okay, I got 2 more questions that we're gonna field. The first one I'm hoping will be easy to answer. The second one will not. So we may run over time a little bit, but I think it's an important question. I think you'll feel engaged. So Alita, this one is specifically for you. You mentioned you are on a personal and professional journey. What is one step we could take to support this work?
I guess support. You can sponsor me to finish the ICER program at the University of Alberta. Just kidding. No, I guess not any support. My support has come from community. It's come from elders. It's come from community leaders. The community leaders are my heroes. Chiefs, councils, youth. They're all a part of this journey and are supporting me in it. When I say support, it's support in the sense that I know I'm on the right path as long as I have these people by my side, and that we're working in partnership, and that I feel included, but also my family feels included. And when I speak family, I speak from the nations. So support, I'm getting a ton of support, and I guess if you come across anybody else that's on this personal and professional journey, it's important to understand that there's an emotional piece that comes with it, but there's also the opportunity, and the opportunity is change, and change, I think, is what we're all after. So supporting each other, yeah, I think we're all on that road, and just being here today in this room talking, that's supporting change.
Thank you. And I think Alita would also suggest that if you do hire liaisons, get them in this program. Absolutely. How do we recognize our own privilege? And how do we challenge others, leaders and influencers, to acknowledge their privilege? So we talk a lot about privilege, white privilege. We also talk about privileging Indigenous knowledge. So you think about an elder who's got 30, 40, 50, 60 years plus of knowledge about the way that the land works and the way that the health of the people is interconnected with the health of the land. And that elder goes to a meeting with industry, and industry might give that elder an honorarium, for example, of $150 for praying and opening the meeting. How much would a not Aboriginal consultant get paid for going to that meeting? And why are we not privileging those 30, 40, 50, 60 years of knowledge that are going to save us in the end? Or there will be an end. We need to privilege Indigenous knowledge in our educational institutions, in our organizations, our liaisons who have knowledge specific to build partnerships with the first people of this land. They probably get paid less than the sales manager or the sales positions do. They probably don't have a bonus structure that includes, if you can build a relationship with a community, then your salary scale goes up. They probably don't have much influence even over how much sponsorship dollars that the organization they work for gets to contribute back to communities or to Indigenous serving organizations, or to Aboriginal organizations that serve the social and economic well-being of our people. So I'm going to get off my little tangent right now and also mention what Paul Verhazen said earlier about the blanket exercise. That's a great demonstrator of white privilege and what happened in Canada. And Tim, on to you.
What am I doing? We're talking addressing about how do we recognize privilege and challenge leaders and influencers around privilege. Actually, it was interesting because it was a great keynote speech at lunch. And it was interesting that one of our friends from Alexander asked a question, and when he responded, how can we connect? How can we reach out? And he responded, and I looked over at Alita and said, oh, darn, wrong answer. Well, we're really busy, like on fate, and please, trust me, I'm not trying to disrespect the gentleman. I really appreciated everything he had to say, and I really do wish him success with phase 2. But he did say on phase 1, well, we were kind of really focused on just getting phase 1 done. We had to get the money, then we had to get the things done, blah, 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 blah. And now we're on phase 2, and we're thinking about it, and I want to be really more successful, and I want to get her done and everything else. And so how do we connect? Well, look, we got 700 pieces of equipment coming, blah, blah, blah. He kept going and going and going and going. Never once pre-engagement. Never once reaching out, asking what organizations are out there. Well, you're never going to find out if you don't go out and find out who they are. If you don't actually wish to connect, you probably won't find them. And corporations still continue to speak. I understand we have a country called Canada, and we've got provinces that we plopped over top. I do a little youth thing that I used to do a little youth thing where I would show kids of various backgrounds, but I talk about Canada. And the way I started the map of Canada was I actually put it with the completed treaties. And I showed there's Canada, and then I started laying over the provinces as the other lines got drawn over top of them. And I would just ask the youth, I wonder what Canada would be like if those were our provinces underneath those lines, and we were all engaged in a manner of equal footing, versus what we ended up with which was the other lines drawn over top, and nobody engaging those treaties, nobody engaging that conversation. So in terms of privilege, it's one thing that we have our regulatory regimes, we do all our stuff, we're answering to shareholders' business money, I get all that stuff, and no problems. But in terms of community, the right answer is, yeah, I've already blown it, haven't I? Let's get you a name. Let's make you me the name or someone the name. Let's get engaged. So that's all I can say. If all you're doing is letting a project or a new business opportunity lead you in the conversation, then you're working from a different position of privilege when it comes to the First Nations and Métis communities, that you're not getting what the conversation is.
I have to say that from time to time I lean on white privilege because many people don't know that I'm Indigenous. And I use that to my advantage to further the interests of the communities that I'm engaged with. And I don't think that's wrong. It is wrong. I shouldn't have to do it, right? And I probably shouldn't do it, but I do because it works. And I think I should be ashamed and embarrassed about that, but I'm not. I walk in both worlds. I'm Métis. Indigenous people of this land are the original entrepreneurs. We understand how to make economies work. The traditional ways of governance are far superior to Western ways of governance. When you think about that, creation stories come from the land. The land speaks to us. We are of the land. And creation stories that come from the land are elders whose knowledge we're hopefully going to privilege down the road at some point. They can repeat word for word for generations. What better way of learning is there? Who among us can do that? I can't even repeat Little Red Riding Hood word for word, and I must have heard it, I don't know, 500 times when I was a child. So to carry the knowledge of songs and the wisdom of elders through creation stories that in turn becomes the governance systems of communities when governance systems are traditional, it's a beautiful thing, and it's something we can all learn from. And so I say, let's privilege Indigenous knowledge, and the leaders in this room and the people who have influence, why don't we all get the companies that you work with and the circles that you are exposed to ensure that they bring on board Indigenous liaisons, Indigenous liaisons, and train them to be the people that can be those frontline runners for your organization and to do the work that we all need to do together in a good way. I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to share our few ideas with you, and I'm going to give the mic to Tim shortly, but thank you, Women Building Futures, for the opportunity to be here. And my esteemed colleagues, it is an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you. And Tim, Alita, I'm going to give it to Alita, and then you can have the last word, okay?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm always encouraged to get to know people. I think there's always an opportunity to learn from each other, and I encourage you to come up and introduce yourself and say hi, give a business card, and love to get to know you guys a bit better, but essentially just thank you for having us. And Sandra, thank you for everything also.
Okay. I'm supposed to mention those brochures over there. The course is a very important course, a very quick Flint thing. Another thing was a 6-year journey to Indigenous awareness training. And who were my, actually I almost resigned. I actually did go back to the executive and say, that's it, I'm thrown in the hat, I can't take this anymore. Training and development, holy mackerel, those people are something else too. Oops. Anybody in training and development, come and get your hug after from me. In the end, they were my opportunity to learn. And all they kept saying was, well, we haven't got time. Look, if we can get it in a hotel, let's say like the Radisson, you know, here in Edmonton, and maybe another hotel down in Calgary, we can kind of have a few people come in. They can do 3 hours. We can get them in and out, maybe do a little lunch. Good, okay, and then they'll be ready to go, right? And I'd say, nope. No, actually, they'll be armed with just enough knowledge to be dangerous to themselves, the company, and everybody around them. Okay, can we do 6 hours? Nope. Can we do 1 day? Nope. What do we have to do? Well, I actually have an opportunity for you. And Flint bought on it. And I'm going to share this one. It was a very interesting journey. And it was that through meeting Pat McCocus, I did actually get to touch a residential school in St. Paul. I got to touch the residential school that was taken over by the first First Nations in Canada. And I knew from the minute I touched it that I'd already lived it for 18 years. And I knew that if I was going to change anybody's mind, I had to change their heart first. You can intellectualize this all you like, but your heart has to be changed. And ultimately, I fought that 1.5 years, and we did have, for the time that I remained at the company, 100+ people go through and actually have to drive for a full day and back and spend 3 days at Blue Quills College twice in a year in order to begin to understand what they were engaging with. And that was only the beginning. So I wanted to throw that out. Second point, we haven't talked a lot about women here. I just want you to know that my experience living in First Nation was pretty simple, and nothing against the guys. I had a great time. I was taught lots. We had lots of fun. But in the end, when I went to where I went, and now I don't even want to name the community because I don't want to get in trouble with the guys, but it was the women who kept the community going. I wasn't ready for what I encountered in Delaney, and that's not Delaney's fault. My children and my wife were not ready for what we encountered. What we did do was we stuck through it for 16 years, and I always like to say we made it to the outside of the inner circle. But what we encountered in terms of the rage, the anger, the frustration, things that, boy, when we first got on the ground, we did not understand what was going on, but we listened. We just kept quiet and listened. And all through that, what I saw was the mothers and grandmothers. I saw the women struggling to hold that community together. And everywhere I've been, it was the women who held that community together, as far as I'm concerned. And I will always stand on that. There is a society of women, and it's global, but it's specific in terms of Indigenous. And in terms of what we're doing here, in terms of women building futures, and in terms of the engagement woman to woman, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, whatever, what I wish is that you would all empower each other to move forward, to do what you've always been doing, that we don't have to laud your accolades per se here at this moment. But I would really encourage each of you to continue to do what you have been doing. Bring that strength of womanhood, the circle of women and the power of women in prayer, in your daily lives, however it is that you drive it. You bring that forward and make us men who want to support you better through that process. That was, I knew there was a second thing, but I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you. Quickly, business cards, brochures, we're available to you throughout the rest of the conference, and we have a nice young artist coming up.
So we just wanted to say thank you all for your wonderful words, very wise words and very true, very truthful, and resonated a lot with me. So from WBF, we'd like to give you guys these gifts. Alita. So it's a print that our very talented Garrett had done up for us, so thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
The only other thing I want to say was I hope that this was different than any other Indigenous engagement thing that you have been to. You're looking at 3 practitioners who didn't hold back, I think, too many punches. We weren't being polite. I hope we weren't offensive.